Bueno.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon everyone, and welcome to Espacio Fundación Telefónica. Thank you for being here this afternoon with us, and like the protagonists in Joe Abercrombie's books, we are decent people. Please, a big round of applause for our author.
Oh, that.
I need to just apologise to the people behind who get this view of the back of my head, where there was once a wonderful head of lustrous hair, but as they've probably noticed, the slight beginning of male pattern baldness has now set in. So I apologise to you guys. You'll just have to live with it.
Muchas gracias, Joe, por estar aquí esta tarde.
Thank you, Joe, for being here with us this afternoon, and thank you for introducing to us the Devils. Please don't ask for more applause because we're generous, but maybe not that much. And also, we are short of time, and I know that not the people here are not here to listen to you, but rather to get your signature in your books. So let's move on fast, to the extent of our possibilities, so that they can have your signed books at the end. So first of all, I would like to congratulate each and every one of you for being here today, because you managed to get your tickets in 12 minutes. This was the time the tickets lasted online to be here today. It was just a real phenomenon. This is something unseen, that all the tickets ran out, and even the night before, all the web collapsed because people thought that they would be able to get the tickets to be here. So everything surrounding the Devils is going to be is being phenomenal. I know that this is the best-selling books out of all your books here in Spain, and it's been here for only 2 months. Outside of Spain, it's been having a lot of success as well. I think it was 5th in the New York Times book list when it came out to the bookstores in the United States. This is really an enormous success. And you have had people introducing your books that are really world-class introducers, Sam and Anderson in Salt Lake City, and also you've been introduced by Robin Hobb and Rufus as well. And please tell us a little bit about these introductions and this tour in the United States. Why people had a love when you mentioned this name? I don't really get why. Can you explain why?
A selection of insignificant writers who, I like to reach out the hand of friendship as a success, to give a chance for the little guy like George R.R. Martin, a little-known writer, but very talented. I think he's got a chance of being something big one day. Robin Hobb was another, as you said. Brandon Sanderson, that cheeky little guy. I think he could make it big one day. And Pat Rothfuss, you mentioned, Stephen Graham Jones, the horror writer. There was just a really good range of people, and it was humbling to be able to kind of share a stage with some of these guys. And great crowds out there, great crowds here. It's lovely to look into the eyes of you, the little people, and bring joy into your otherwise dark and meaningless lives.
Yo creo que Arantxa...
I think Arantxa said it wonderfully. Your book has been a real success, and this means that many readers are going to discover you, starting with the Devils. But there's life before the Devils. I think that there are readers who have discovered you through the Devils, and those that were reading you before. And before the Devils, you had 20 years of writing between the years that you've been published and before, when you were trying to become this greatest author among all those of the authors that are in this area. You have published 2 trilogies and also a collection of short stories, etc. So why this change, and why closing the circle of the world? And this is one of the questions that have been asked most of the times. Why did you want to finish the saga before this one and start a new one with the Devils?
It has been a long road, like Frodo taking the ring to Mount Doom, but a bit less heroic, if I'm honest, and with less handsome side characters on the whole. It's been a long time, and I wrote, as you say, the First Law books and the Shattered Sea books. So my first book, The Blade itself, came out to ecstatic reviews from my mother. My brother was more mixed. That was about it. There wasn't a huge amount of excitement, but gradually the books have kind of built over time. But I think when you write a long, complex series with a lot of characters, interrelated plots, weight of backstory, it's easy to get kind of bogged down in the scale of that. And it can be a bit of a turn-off for new readers. They see, it's book 10 now, what am I going to do? Start on book 1? It's nice to give them something new to get their teeth into, and as a writer it's good to try new styles of fiction, to try different plots, different sorts of character. You've got to keep yourself interested and involved. So The Devils was really my attempt to do something not entirely radical and new, but to give people a kind of jumping off point. Readers could start there and go back if they wanted. And it's also an opportunity to shake up the publishing a little bit. From a commercial standpoint, it's hard for a publisher to really do something big and new with book 10, you know, but with a new book, a new world, a new kind of milieu, a new tone, it gives them the chance to pitch a writer in a new way and hopefully to a new audience. So it felt like the right time to do it. I think I will go back to the First Law books at some point, but for now, it's nice to be in a slightly different world.
Le doy paso a Arantxa ahora, pero
I will give the floor to Arantxa, but the person who told you that it was difficult to be successful with your 10th book or 11th book, Sanderson maybe could have been the author who told you that?
He seems to be extremely successful with every book. It's very hard to imitate what he's done, because he has this work ethic that unfortunately, as a lazy person, I cannot imitate.
Bueno, si os parece.
Well, if you're okay with it, I'm going to run a quick survey to know how many people here have read The Devils here. Well, quite a few. You've done your homework, and of course we too have read it. And I'm here because I recommended your book to until I was extenuated of recommending it. Alex, when he offered me to read, suggested me that I read The Devils, I was already a fan of yours, and I don't think that maybe only 2 days after his suggestion, I wrote to him and told him, oh my God, this is wonderful. It'd been quite a long time since I last laughed as hard with a book, that I didn't have such a great time with a book. I think that this is a very necessary book for the times that we're going through, to evade this current world and to have fun. And I'm not paid for this. I'm not paid for being here, for saying all these things. I'm really talking from the bottom of my heart. And although I see that most of the people here have read your book, there are many people who will be watching this on YouTube, those of you who couldn't get a hold of a ticket, or those of you who do not live in Madrid. So could you explain to those people what The Devils is about, what they're going to be finding there?
Sure. I mean, from a plot and content point of view, it's basically the story of a set of monsters that the Pope keeps in the basement to solve the problems the righteous are not equipped to handle. From a kind of approach point of view, I wanted to write something fun, above all. I'd written some books that had humour in them, but were pretty cynical, quite dark. I was sort of known for my pessimism, my withering cynicism about humanity. I didn't necessarily want that to be my only offering to the world, or that would somehow encapsulate everything I think about life. And so by way of doing something new, I wanted to do something fun, something that focused on the comedic aspects up to a point, that also had a lot of action, that pulled the reader through from start to finish, and was quite kind of tightly focused on a small group of characters. I'd written lots of complicated books with big casts and lots of complex plotting, and so I wanted this to be simple, to focus on the dialogue and the people first.
Es un libro.
It is a book that is fun, with this new ironic sort of tone that you wanted to insert in the narration, but also you wanted to write a book that was that had a lot of in-depth to it, that was profound. You had been talking about sort of reviewing the history of Europe, not only in The Devils, where you talk about a parallel Europe, and it is more obvious, but also in the previous saga. You had already talked about this, and I'm talking about this because fantasy is also sort of a channel to discover realities that go beyond humor, and in this novel you have taken this revision of history to the over the edge almost, by bringing this inverted religion, and also by giving us this new reading of the history of Europe. Are you interested in history? This is one of the drivers behind the Devils, or is it just because?
Because no, it's I've always been fascinated by history, and the First Law books are certainly very much influenced by history, by military history especially, but the history of Europe and all kinds of aspects I've always been fascinated by. And in a way, the First Law world does draw very heavily on European history and has an equivalent of Renaissance Italy, an equivalent of the Holy Roman Empire, the British Empire. All those things find their way into it. But with The Devils, I wanted to try something slightly different by setting the story in Europe, a kind of strange, alternative, slightly stupid version of Europe, a very ill-researched one, I will admit, but that gives you the opportunity to do something slightly different. You can make references that readers will get very quickly. When you talk about a Scandinavian werewolf as opposed to a poor German effort, straight away readers will kind of understand what you mean. And of course, jokes about England are always important to do as well. Thank you. I feel they go down well on the continent especially, but they also go down well with the English. In fact, I had a review very recently who he noted that there were so many jokes about England, the author must be Scottish. So I think an alternative Europe gives you all these opportunities and is just a lot of fun to work with. I found it fun, and you just don't need that much research. I found drawing the map really easy because it's just Europe. Andy.
En tu país te quieren mucho, está claro.
I'm sure that in your country they love you.
Perdón.
Sorry. One of the things that I have particularly liked about this book is that I find fresher and more original is that you have broken with the classical idea of medieval fantasy, and you have brought it to a less known world, which is the Byzantine world. And this is not only about that, but also you are creating this church that is an empowered church. So we have this Pope that is a woman, and we also have a savior, the daughter of God. How did you dare to do this? Was this something that you had thought beforehand, or did you want to be excommunicated or what?
Disappointing. I'm still waiting for the excommunication, but His Holiness has so far overlooked my trespasses. It'd be a great thing for the publicity, wouldn't it, to be excommunicated? No, I think it's very easy when you're working in a kind of historical setting or a faux historical setting for it to become very male, because in a way the automatic choice is kings and the councillors of kings and generals and warriors. They're all male kind of archetypes. And when I wrote my first trilogy, without thinking about it, I made the cast very, very male. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it can become a little one-noted. it's nice to have variety in the cast and diversity in the kinds of relationships, the kind of people. And so it seemed an interesting way to kind of bring women very naturally into the story, was to have a female saviour, therefore a female priesthood. And so rather than horrible old men in the background of the story, you have the opportunity for horrible old women. I like to be an equal opportunities writer as far as dealing out the vile character traits to my cast. If you only have 2 or 3 women in your story, they have to stand in for womanhood as a whole. But if you have lots of women naturally brought in, they're free to kind of be characters in their own right, to be a forgetful werewolf or, you know, a sad and miserable invisible elf, rather than simply the love interest or the mother. So, yeah, making the female church was certainly one thing I was keen to do.
¿Has tenido, digamos, algún...
Have you had any reaction in this sense? Have they come with torches to go around you, to seat your house?
Disappointing level of outrage so far. In New York, in Barnes & Noble on Union Square, not a terribly religious setting of itself. I did events in a Presbyterian church in Austin and a Baptist church in Salt Lake City. Those went fine. Barnes & Noble in Union Square, there was a man who called, "Christ is King," halfway through the talk, but then he kind of skulked off. He didn't follow through really with the outrage, and that's about as far as it's gone. Generally, people have just been happy to accept it. I mean, people think it's bad. There are certainly those, but there aren't many people who are truly upset and offended, which is very disappointing, obviously.
Y otra cosa que me llamaba
Something else that really caught my eye about this historic context that we were talking about before is that the fact that Troy exists in your parallel world. The Greek didn't win, but Hector killed Achilles, and this is the capital of the Eastern Empire. And something else that you have changed, and I am very curious about where this idea came from. Instead of Saracens, we have cannibalistic elves. So,
well, I suppose I was kind of interested in roads not travelled in history generally. I've always been fascinated by Carthage and the Carthaginian Empire and their war with Rome, the Punic Wars, Hannibal, all of that stuff. And so it seemed like one interesting change would be to have Carthage triumph over Rome and the effect that would kind of have on the Mediterranean basin in general. But then also the Trojans winning the Trojan War also felt like it'd, you know, be an interesting thing to explore. At the same time, I didn't want history to deviate too far from where it is. I want things to be kind of recognisable, but those breadcrumbs of Hector defeating Achilles and Cassandra outwitting Odysseus and things like that felt like they'd be kind of nice breadcrumbs for readers who recognise those things. I've always been really interested in Byzantium as well. I think we often think of Western Europe as the heart of the medieval world. I was reading this fascinating statistic that in 1066 London had about 10,000 inhabitants, Paris had about 30,000, Byzantium had about 400,000, and Baghdad 1.5 million. So Western Europe was really this tiny little afterthought, this addendum on the edge of the world, and the world, the civilized world, was Byzantium and the kind of Near East. And so I was kind of interested in looking a little bit at a more Byzantine kind of structure for things. I think we don't see enough of that, maybe.
Yo quiero seguir preguntando.
I would like to keep asking about the characters, but before that I would like to go back to a topic that you mentioned before, that you wanted to give sort of a cosmovision of how I understand life, and the big theme of this novel is convenience. There's actually a chapel, the Chapel of the Holy Expediency, and it's based on what is convenient for me and to my people against what it is convenient to others. Is this your vision of life? We need to make things more convenient for each of us, like the characters in your novel?
I suppose they're people who are expected to do what has to be done. in fantasy I read as a kid, there were often a lot of characters who do the right thing for the right reasons. I've always been fascinated by people who do the wrong thing for the right reasons, or the right thing for the wrong reasons. I like people who are flawed and confusing and kind of difficult. And so these characters, I suppose, are an expression of that. They're almost heroes, but at the same time, they're almost the villains of the story. And I suppose I've always liked to explore these grey areas between hero and villain.
Y entre estos...
And among all these characters that you have explored in these grey areas, is there any in particular? And I'm going to ask this because between the two big trilogies of the Circle of the World, there were novels or stories that were devoted to secondary characters because you maybe favored them or you wanted to explore them further. Can we expect that out of the characters that we see in The Devils, there are some characters that you might want to explore further in an independent novel?
I mean, I think the idea with these books, so there'll certainly be 3, because I signed a deal for 3, so kind of have to deliver those now, probably, or pay a lot of money back, which would be bad. So there will be 3 at least. I mean, I hope more, but the idea is that with each book, the central cast shifts a little bit. So there are some characters who kind of stay, but each time there's a new priest. So in The Devils, Brother Diaz is this kind of bumbling, ambitious guy, totally out of his depth in this world. In the next book, the priest is a very focused, very experienced, very hard-headed woman, very different kind of priest, which gives the story a very different tone. And so the cast naturally shifts and changes. Some people die, some people leave, new monsters appear. There's a talking cat in the next book. Always popular, I find, with the readers. And so with each book there'll be some churn and some shifting of the central cast, which hopefully will give each one a slightly different mood and a different feel. And the style of story will change a bit as well. This is very much a classical quest, a journey from A to B. The next book is a more complicated kind of whodunit in one setting. So it's an opportunity to try out different styles of story, different styles of character with each book, I hope. The idea is each one stands alone. It doesn't become a big weighty series where there's a lot left undone between books.
Porque tu favorito creo que era el hermano Díaz, ¿no?
I think your favorite was Brother Diaz, I think. Well, as Spanish, we are really grateful for you to have included one of the main characters here in this community of the ring that is sort of awkward. There's a Spanish character, which is Brother Diaz, and we don't really know if he comes from Asturias or from León. Are you really sort of trying to recall the Avilés festival?
A bit. It's always on my mind to some degree. I think the slaughterhouse in Avilés gets mentioned at one point, which was sort of an in-joke for my friends who organised the festival. But I've loved coming to Avilés, you know, every year, more or less. Not every year, but most years since it started. Was it 13, 14 years ago? And it's kind of become a fixture in my year. I meet more English authors there than I do in England, generally. It's a brilliant place to meet authors and to meet readers, and I really feel Spain is one place where kind of being here in person over time has really had an effect on how the books have sold and how the books have kind of been taken to the heart of an audience. It definitely still is possible to turn up in person and sign books for people and kind of help to grow an audience in that old-fashioned way, I guess.
Sí. Y luego
Also, recall me that at the end we need to ask you a question about Barcelona. We cannot forget that. But before that, we'd like to ask you 2 questions that are from your readers, because we won't have time for a Q&A today. But a few days ago, we asked them in social media what they would like to ask you. And we had 2 questions from them. One of them is, which is your favorite character in The Devils? And the second question that I love, and I would have liked to have thought of it myself, if you were part of this chapel of the Holy Experience, what type of character would you be?
Brother Diaz. I mean, that more or less is me. mid-ranking administrator, promoted far above his level of competence, desperately trying to cling on by his fingernails and give the impression he knows what he's doing. I mean, that is, they say write what you know. So that's what I've done with him. In terms of my own favourite character, funnily enough, this question came up yesterday, and Chakotay was there, and he gave a brilliant answer, which was, I don't believe in the idea of favourites. It's like, what's your favourite ingredient of the dish? You know, they only work in contrast with each other. So for me, it's like asking, what's your favourite component in the engine? You know, the engine doesn't go unless you have all the bits, and often the more vivid, intense characters who kind of are the punchline to the joke, they don't work without the build-up to the joke, so you need the more simple, more straight, more ordinary characters to sit alongside them. But it's Vigga, having said that. Because she was the easiest to write for me. Sometimes I find when I start writing a character, you don't really know how they'll turn out. And sometimes they just have this voice and this personality very quickly that takes shape, and you don't need to work on it very much. I don't like work on the whole, and so if I don't need to work on a character, that's a wonderful thing. And Vigga came onto the page pretty much fully formed, and because she has this rough, earthy voice, it doesn't need a lot of revision and a lot of fine-tuning. It's sort of there straight away. So she worked very nicely. Yeah.
Bueno, tengo que confesar que es
I have to confess that it is my favorite character as well, for obvious reasons, because I like Nordic things in general. So, but I also wanted to ask you,
que tienes en mente
if you have in mind any spin-off of Vigga or other characters.
I mean, I suppose that, you know, several of the characters will continue to be part of the core team as we go through these 3 books and possibly beyond, if people continue to buy them, obviously. And so I would see that most of the characters would come in and out of the stories. There'll be some they're not in, giving room for other people to appear. Whether I see a kind of very specific spin-off, I'm not sure. Often people will love a character and they'll see something in that character, they'll want more from them at the end of a story. So people often say to me, when are you going to write the young Logan Ninefingers series? And I say, I'm not going to do that. Because to me, what makes that character work are the breadcrumbs that are there. And if people want to know more, it means you did the job, it worked well. Doesn't necessarily mean you should endlessly mine that same seam for more. I always think of the Force. You know, the Force worked. It was perfect in the original Star Wars films. Never has a concept needed explaining less than that. Did it help? I don't feel it helped. So generally, I like to use the characters sparingly and not overuse them. Yeah.
Uno de los personajes favoritos de estos lectores.
One of the main characters of these readers who have sent their impressions to us during this week is Jacob, that maybe is really more of a traditional knight with his fears, with his terrors, his nightmares, and his being reborn so many times. But at the same time is sort of a recovering restating this traditional knight, if you wish.
Yeah, I mean, one archetype, one kind of classic figure from fantasy I hadn't really tackled up until this point was the world-weary man of violence. So it felt like an opportunity to really break new ground. Honestly, it's always been a successful kind of figure for me. I've always been fascinated by violence in fantasy. Generally, fantasy characters, Legolas, Gimli, Aragorn, they're warriors, they're fighters, they're killers. But often, at the end of the quest, they can hang up their sword, axe, bow, whatever it may be, and return to ordinary life and be gentle lovers and wonderful kings and good friends. In real life, people who perpetrate a lot of violence and count how many corpses they've stacked up during a siege of Helm's Deep, for example, they might find it hard to return to ordinary life. They might have consequences, physical scars, emotional scars. And so I suppose I've always been interested in exploring that ground. And Jakob, as a man who actually can't die, he can only be endlessly injured more and more, is another meditation, I guess, on the nature of violence and the cost of violence, and whether it's possible for a very violent man to find redemption.
No sabemos si habrá, como
We don't know, as you were saying before, if there will be more spin-offs, because we are still waiting for people to buy the books, but it has been mentioned that Mr. Cameron is interested maybe in doing a movie out of the Devils. So how do you take this? What do you think about this possibility of going into the big screen?
I do like the possibility. I think writers can often have this idea that the adaptation is the holy grail. You know, it's the whole point of the career, is to try and reach the point of having something on the screen. And one of the questions that people will ask you when they find out you're a writer is, have you had anything adapted? You know, are you published? And you say, yes, I'm published. Have you had anything adapted? You say, no, I haven't, no, they don't. And in a way, for every Game of Thrones, which makes a huge difference and is a big cultural moment and is a huge thing for the career of the writer, there are many things that don't have that kind of impact, that come out and might be watched and relatively successful, a season or two of TV, then they disappear. It's not the huge thing always that people think it might be. What I'm trying to say is I keep my expectations as low as possible and then hope to be pleasantly surprised. But obviously, James Cameron is a big figure. He's very excited to be working with me, I'm sure. But you couldn't get much bigger figure, so it's a very good chance for him. It's as good a chance as I think you'll get, but it's certainly not a sure thing. There's no such thing. But it's lovely to be, you know, co-writing with James Cameron. It's all right, isn't it? I mean, you can't complain. And it's a good opportunity. I'm going to try and learn what I can from it and get as much fun out of it as I can. I find that screen work is a nice complement to a book writing career, because books are quite lonely. You spend a lot of time staring at the screen on your own, occasionally being shouted at by editors, but that's quite a rare thing. Whereas working in TV and film, you're part of an ensemble and a group who all bring new ideas in, who hopefully improve the thing, take it in directions you never expected. And so it's a lot of fun to work on, even if it never quite gets there. But of course, I'm always hopeful that this time it will get there.
Como fan,
As a fan of your book, and I will imagine that this will have happened to other readers, as soon as we learned that Cameron had bought the rights, even if it doesn't turn out right in the end, because we know what the film industry is about, and there are always many questions around it, but it makes us dream, and also dream about a casting of the actors. Have you already thought of any actors for your characters?
There have been some superficial discussions, but generally you write first, and I think you write with the character in mind, and then you hope to cast later, is my experience. And the casting, from my past experience, is there's so many aspects to it that are not to do with who would be the best person for the character as they appear in the book. It's really a very important part of the commercial package of a film or a TV series. Often you're looking for people whose name and presence and kind of reputation will help you to get the thing over the hump of being made. And of course you need people who actually want to do the job. You need people who like the script and who say yes to it. And so the focus is always get the script right, get the script as good as you can, and if the roles are good, hopefully you can get the right people when the time comes. But it's pointless trying to blue sky too much, because you'll inevitably be disappointed. And of course the other thing that happens is people say, well, I mean, a young Bruce Willis would be perfect. You cannot actually cast young Bruce Willis, because he is now the age he is. You need a new actor who might be in a similar mould. it's quite an art and a science casting. So I try to step back from it and let that be someone else's headache.
Pero como yo soy periodista,
But I am a journalist aside of being an author, so I will insist, because I know that when you write, you also have in your mind certain references. So please dive in and tell us what actors would you cast for your characters?
I mean, certainly 6.5-foot Swedish muscle-bound tattooed women are relatively thin on the ground, so that also presents some difficulties. I'm not sure that I actually had specific casting in mind. I always find that quite a difficult thing. I find that when you see an adaptation and you've read the book before, it's when you first see it, they're never quite right, but after you've seen it, you can never go back. So I have no idea how I saw Aragorn when I first read Lord of the Rings, even though I read it 10 times before the films happened. Now it's always going to be Viggo Mortensen, right? Ian McKellen is Gandalf, isn't he? It's very hard to see a different version of Gandalf. And so when I'm writing, I try to have a kind of neutral sense about what the characters look like, feel like, and it's only when something's really misfiring that I'll try and reach for an actor or a real person, because sometimes some essence of that person can help you to get inside the head of the character. It gives you a feel for who they might be. But in the case of the Devils, I don't think I've actually got any that are really well established in my mind. I couldn't pick one. Maybe Liam Neeson for Jakob. Yeah, Liam Neeson in his Kingdom of Heaven incarnation was pretty close.
He tenido una conversación antes aquí en el backstage.
We had a conversation in the backstage before. We said, okay, they tell you one thing and then they think another and they tell you something different. So we can continue because we were supposed to have finished by now. But I think there was one question missing, and I think that you need to answer this one. What happened in Barcelona? Tell us. Come on, please, let us all encourage him to answer so we know what happened in Barcelona.
Me has mirado con cara de odio, ¿eh? O sea, he visto un poco de odio en tu mirada.
So I think that you're hating me right now, right? But you have to tell us what happened.
Fortunately, I'm contractually prevented from revealing the events that may or may not have occurred in Barcelona. What happens in Barcelona stays in Barcelona, I understand. I was saying earlier,
sabía que ibas a decir eso.
I knew you were going to say that.
need to keep the mystery, right? The monster not seen is more exciting than the one you do see, so my lips are sealed. I will never reveal those events.
Pero no tiene nada que ver con Gigamés.
So it doesn't have anything to do with Gigamés, for instance?
I can neither confirm nor deny any bookstore was involved.
Bueno, recordamos que
Let's recall that Joe will be in this weekend in Barcelona, and also next week he will also be in the Celsius Festival. We will meet again, and also we have a few more questions from the readers. They asked us for you to give them some advice when it comes to writing grimdark, how they can tackle a grimdark story.
¿Qué es lo más importante?
What is the most important thing you would say when it comes to start writing this type of stories?
In terms of writing generally, the best advice I ever had was from my mother. All the good advice comes from one's mother in the end, I think. And she had read something that I'd written, and I'd said something along the lines of, the sky was like a sable cloth scattered with diamonds. And my mum said, is it? I mean, is the sky like that? You've got to be honest when you write. You've got to be truthful. Everything needs to feel true, because everything that feels a little bit cliche, a little bit of a pat lie, undermines the reader's kind of confidence and their faith in what's happening. So when you use an image, you've got to ask yourself, is the thing like that thing? When you write a line of dialogue, you've got to ask yourself, is that what someone would say in this situation? And if you remain kind of truthful, the most cliched, the most familiar setups can become really fascinating again. And so always asking yourself, is this true, I think is always great advice for any writer, but especially for a fantasy story, when a lot of things might be, in a sense, embellishments, inventions, they might be untrue by nature. It's important to keep hold of as much truth as you can. So I guess that would be the advice I'd give, but I would try generally not to give advice, because usually it explodes in your face later.
Pero sí debe ser un reto.
But it has to be somewhat of a challenge to handle so many characters, because it is true that you had already experience when you had these heroes, you had different characters in each chapter, but I think that this time you really went overboard in terms of the number of characters, of the interactions, and when it comes to the writing itself, it must have been very difficult to handle.
I mean, I think I just really enjoy characters and dialogue within groups. That's just something that's always come relatively naturally to me. When I write a scene, I tend to begin with the dialogue, and I'll almost write it like a script, dialogue almost without interruption and without action and without kind of signifiers. The gold standard, I sometimes think, for writing is when you can do a page of dialogue without anything else and know who's speaking and what's happening, because the voices of the characters are strong enough and identifiable enough that it becomes obvious. And so I've always loved writing dialogue, and I find the descriptive passages often much harder to write and take much more time, and I tend to fill in later on. So for me, a group of characters in conversation is kind of the thing I enjoy most, which was one reason why I wanted to focus on it with this book. So generally that's the part I like the most and that represents the least work, and it's then adding in the other material that starts to become more of a challenge often.
Y sin embargo, aunque sea solo...
But at the same time, to make it only, use only through the dialogues, but I see that you go deeper into the characters. We knew before what had marked the lives of the characters, but here we also see a lot more about their feelings. I think that maybe you've become a bit more moving, if you want, with your characters.
Nice to hear. I mean, I think in the end, what you're always trying to do is create characters that kind of touch people and that have layers to them and depths you don't immediately see. One of the great advantages you have as a writer, as opposed to a screenwriter, you know, books as opposed to screen, you have access to the internal. A screenwriter has the advantage of actors, editors, directors who can do all kinds of storytelling devices for you. An actor can achieve with a raised eyebrow what might take you pages to describe, to convey. But as a book writer, you can cheat and say, the character thought this. He remembered that time over there when that other thing happened. He always had a certain feeling about these moments. On film, that's incredibly difficult and takes time and energy and inventive ways to describe, but a book writer has that luxury. And so, as a point of view writer, I've always enjoyed getting into the heads of the people, and I suppose I think of their internal monologue as a dialogue with the reader, in a sense. So I almost think of that as speech as well. I like a book to feel as if it's being narrated in the voice of the character you're looking at the story from.
Y además de diálogos, también tenemos...
Besides dialogues, we have a lot of action scenes. As a writer, I think that the action scenes are the ones that I find more difficult, or the most difficult, when it comes to fighting scenes, and to handle that with so many characters, I think that multiplies the times n the difficulty when it comes to writing it. Was it challenging for you as well, or were there other bigger challenges instead?
I suppose action's the other thing I've often enjoyed, and I guess I like to look at action as a way of expressing character more than... You don't want it to become a kind of dry description of movements and things happening. You want to pick out interesting details, the things that make it fascinating. I suppose I think about action as a film editor would think about action, which is the job that I used to do. And so it's a case of picking out those details, focusing on the moments, and trying to get a sense of the emotion of being in the action rather than to kind of meticulously describe it. But The Devils are certainly an opportunity to write these very elaborate, very long at times, perhaps too long occasionally, action sequences with a lot of complexity. And I kind of wanted to really spread my wings and see how elaborate I can make some of these scenes. The problem is with each one you've kind of got to go a little bit further. So I destroy a tavern first of all, and then you go onto a pair of ships, and then you've got to destroy a whole monastery. And there's this problem of, you know, how far can you go? Which I'm wrestling with in the next book. Maybe I'll just have no action at all. Or maybe I'll have to have even more giant and elaborate and destructive action sequences. Haven't decided yet. We'll see.
Si me permites la...
If you allow me the analogy, when I was reading your action scenes with so many characters, I was reminded of that way of narrating in the Star Wars when they're going to destroy the Death Star, and you move from one character to the other. This type of narrative that has sort of, I don't know how to explain this, that it has a multiple vision, and I think that it's very film-like, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, I think The Devils is very influenced by having worked quite a lot in film and in screenwriting, both in terms of the dialogue and the sort of distribution of characters and the shape of the story. I think I certainly learnt a lot in screenwriting and in editing before I was a writer about how to pace things, how to cut between things. Those skills, in a way, are transferable between book and TV and film, even though the mediums are very different. There's definitely storytelling tricks in common that I've ended up using a lot.
Me dicen ahora sí desde la
Now they're telling me that from the Chapel of the Holy Experience that we need to wrap it up. And thank you everyone, and thank you in particular to Joe. Thank you.
Thanks. Cheers. Thank you.
El procedimiento que vamos a seguir con la...
So, what we're going